Steve Martin unveils 7 actors he detested most. Steve Martin is a name that strikes a chord with nearly everyone who ever loved comedy, film, or late-night show. With his silver locks of hair, sharp wit, and a peculiar knack for balancing sophistication with slapstick, Martin has enchanted audiences for more than half a century. From the jerk to father of the bride, he has had a career that has covered generations, redefining what American comedy can be. To audiences, Steve Martin has always been a charming figure, well-mannered, witty, and seemingly unflappable in the face of Hollywood egos and nonsense. But behind the meticulously honed public image and affable persona, accounts from directors, co-stars, and industry professionals reveal an entirely different figure. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. Underneath the smile, Steve Martin has a reputation as a perfectionist. He insists on exacting standards, a structured style of comedy, and little tolerance for fellow professionals who don't meet his expectations of how a performance should proceed. Though he seldom commented publicly on conflict, insiders in Hollywood whisper that Martin kept an unspoken mental list of actors whom he simply could not abide and in some instances refused to work with a second time. For decades, those tensions were concealed, masked by courteous smiles and professional protocol. But now that insiders have started revealing hitherto guarded secrets, we finally catch a glimpse of the 7 actors who pushed Martin's patience to its limits. This is the secret life of comedy's gentle genius, a Steve Martin portrait not as the perpetual grin of the entertainer, but as a craftsman embroiled in philosophical wars with some of Hollywood's most prominent players. The outcomes reveal more than mere personality vendettas. They reveal profound fault lines over what comedy actually is and how it ought to be crafted. Chevy Chase, When Egos Collided on Three Amigos. To viewers, Three Amigos 1986 was unadulterated comedic bliss. Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short played hapless silent film legends confused with actual heroes in a Mexican town. The film went on to become a cult favorite, replete with quotable dialogue such as "My Little Buttercup" and "Would you say I have a plethora of piñatas?" However, on set, the vibe was anything but light. Martin and Chase were poles apart in comedy. Martin, the philosophical, intellectual turned meticulous comedian, entered every scene like a mathematician, measuring timing, rhythm, and wordplay to the final beat. Chase, having just been propelled out of Saturday Night Live, lived for anarchy. He adored improvising, hijacking scripted moments, and stealing laughs from unpredictability. Director John Landis, who had the unfortunate task of pleasing both men, later referred to it as fire meeting ice. Martin would have a scene carefully prepared, and then Chase would swoop in with a spontaneous gag that toppled all the preparation. Tensions boiled over during a dance and dialogue sequence. Following Chase's disruption of the rhythm on the 7th take, by improvising once again, Martin allegedly cornered Landis and threatened, "Either he goes by the script or I leave." The feud never escalated to shouted arguments, but the tension was visible. Members of the crew later described the set as a battlefield between 2 philosophies of comedy. Years later, at a Comedy Awards gala, Martin made a barbed comment. "If ego were money, Chevy could buy Wall Street." The audience chuckled, but insiders knew the sting in the joke. The irony, naturally, is that despite their differences, Three Amigos itself is still well-loved for the very reason that it managed to balance Martin's order with Chase's chaos. But for Martin, the battle wounds never healed, and he never again opted to work in close tandem with Chase. Jim Carrey, When Chaos Met Control. The confrontation between Steve Martin and Jim Carrey was less overt, but no less significant. Carrey, with his physical manicness, rubbery face, and improvisational abandon, was the personification of all Martin had striven to elevate himself beyond. While Martin viewed comedy as architecture, meticulously constructed and engineered, Carrey perceived it as jazz, improvisational, and free-flowing. Their most notorious meeting was at the 1995 American Comedy Awards. Carey, fresh from the height of his popularity following Ace Ventura and Dumb and Dumber, went on a frenetic, apparently boundless improvisation while accepting an award. The crowd laughed initially, prompting many to squirm afterwards as the bit wore on. Cameras snapped Martin dramatically yawning and glancing at his watch. Afterwards, when Martin went on stage, he held a giant wrap-it-up sign not so subtly insinuating at Carey's excess. Years after that, when a studio suggested teaming the two in a big comedy, Martin reportedly said, "I'd rather perform opposite a tornado. At least with a natural disaster, you can tell which way it's going to spin." That encapsulated the metaphysical divide. Martin required structure, Carey worked in chaos. To date, they've never appeared on screen together. Bill Murray, the Saturday Night Live incident. Well, before Bill Murray was the mysterious person he is now, he was a young, wild Saturday Night Live cast member. Steve Martin, already a popular repeat host, had his comedy calibrated. Timing, accuracy, and synergy. The two were cast together in a sketch in 1978, and it was a disaster. Murray was late to rehearsal. Afterwards, improvising crazily on stage during the live performance, disrupting Martin's painstakingly rehearsed timing. Murray even parroted Martin's delivery on stage at one point, sending Martin visibly agitated. Martin later reprimanded him, reminding him, "Comedy is a partnership, not a hijacking." Murray dismissed it with laughter and advised him to lighten up. What followed was a decade-long freeze. The two avoided each other professionally, and even when they eventually shared stages again, there was a chill in the air. The incident became one of comedy's great what-ifs. What magic could have emerged if Murray's chaos and Martin's order had ever managed to harmonize? Steve Carell, the unlikely tension on the big year. On paper, Steve Martin and Steve Carell were like two peas in a pod. Both had played awkward but lovable characters. Both admired wit in comedy. But during the shooting of The Big Year, 2011, tensions simmered underground. Carell, seasoned by years on The Office, lived for improv, spitting out alternate lines in table reads. Martin, on the other hand, came prepared, lines memorized, performance choreographed. The improv disoriented him. During one rehearsal, Martin grumbled to the director, "Is this a script reading or a writing session? Because I prepared for the former." Even though never explosive, tension was certain. Martin and Carell did not interact off-set much, and for press tours, the studio primarily paired Martin with Jack Black instead. They never shared a shoot together again, though the potential was clearly there. Adam Sandler, the generational divide. If Steve Martin was the epitome of comedy as high art, then Adam Sandler was the unapologetic exemplar of lowbrow comedy. Sandler's man-children with tantrums, potty humor, and slapstick remained wildly popular but were everything Martin wished comedy to move away from. In a 2003 interview, Martin commented, "I love wit. Slapstick is fine, but some things are just noise in a wig." Insiders immediately recognized this as a veiled jab at Sandler's style. When a studio suggested pairing them for a project, Martin declined, saying simply, "I think we're making different kinds of movies." To Martin, Sandler was lost potential, evidence that comedy could be a moneymaker without really saying a thing. Their paths having never crossed is representative of a grand comedy divide. Intellect over instinct, sophistication over silliness. Joe Piscopo, the SNL tension. Steve Martin's dislike of Joe Piscopo, while less publicized, was biting. Piscopo, who flourished through over-the-top impressions of the SNL skids that occurred in the early -80s, represented lazy comedy in Martin's eyes. When Martin came back to host during this time, he was appalled at Piscopo's work, particularly his Frank Sinatra impersonation. Following one rehearsal, Martin was said to have asked, "Is this what the show is now?" He then demanded that Piscopo's bits be rewritten or eliminated. The pressure was so intense that when Lorne Michaels came back to SNL in 1984, Martin reportedly said, "Not with that guy," and did not host again until Piscopo had departed. To Martin, comedy wasn't just about getting laughs, it was about elevating the craft. Piscopo's style, in his eyes, was a betrayal of what SNL once represented. Eddie Murphy, the superstar standoff. If there was one feud that marked a generational transition in comedy, it was between Steve Martin and Eddie Murphy. Murphy was young, edgy, and street smart. His stand-up charged, his movie career taking off with Beverly Hills Cop and 48 Hours. Martin, on the other hand, was the older establishment of cerebral, formulaic comedy. Though Martin praised Murphy's talent publicly, insiders revealed he privately rejected multiple chances to collaborate. Martin felt Murphy relied too heavily on profanity and shock rather than wit. Murphy, in turn, dismissed Martin as out of touch. In 1984, Murphy remarked, "Some of these guys look down on street comics, but I'm speaking the